Sara Kruzan made headlines when she was sentenced to life without parole after taking the life of the man who began sex trafficking her when she was only 13 years old. Now, in her heartbreaking and empowering new memoir, I Cried to Dream Again, she's opening up about the horror and injustice she faced as a victim who endured years of abuse.
The grooming started when I was 11. A man named Gigi, who had been watching me, approached me as I was walking home from school. It was almost like I was the perfect victim. So by the time I was 13, he was selling me to other men. You're almost not even seen as a human being. You're just there to be a commodity. I was 16. When I shot him, it happened like boom. And immediately I was like, I am so sorry. I was arrested March 14th, 1994. They did not allow any defense on the abuse on myself. When I heard it, the sentencing, I couldn't comprehend what that meant. I was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole plus 4 years.
Sara Kruzan joins us now in a broadcast exclusive. Sara, thank you so much for joining us. I have your book here in my hand, and we'll talk about that. Well, I imagine just that journey in writing what happened in the past. I was so struck by the fact that you were only 11 when this man started grooming you and building that trust. You were a baby, and he offered you things like candy, clothes, attention. And you said, eventually, when you became a teenager, he told you these words: I have been waiting for this day when I can collect on my investment. Did you know what that meant, what he was saying at that time?
No, absolutely not. I knew that innately I was in a position where I was already like surrendering and compliant, and I knew how to please the grown-ups in my life. Looking back now in hindsight, I was just there and open and willing.
You write in the memoir, we girls and women all felt tied to him by an invisible chain. And we know that people have equated human trafficking to slavery. And I know sometimes people get a reaction, wait a minute, but it is. You're not in physical chains, but you are chained to this person.
100%. I think it's not only inclusive of generational trauma, it also ties into sacrificing our children in ways that allow people who pull the energy from children or feed that sense of negativity. And I believe it goes a lot deeper than just being trafficked.
You were 16 years old when you fatally shot that man. You were sentenced to life without parole. Evidence of the abuse you endured was not allowed in court. You're, again, a kid up against the system, and the system wronged this kid. Like, I'm going away. 16, I won't ever be able to have a normal teenage life. I won't go to the prom. I won't experience simple joys that a 16-year-old, your sweet 16, was a prison sentence gift.
Yes, I think to understand where my mind was at that time, my standard bar to relate to what that felt like was very oppressed in itself. So going to prison almost seemed like, okay, this is a new journey and I will figure it out on the way. So I didn't really have much of pleasant memories or experiences other than what I was bringing at that particular time to compare the experience.
Coming up, how Sara is using her story to help others, and how we're able to talk to her now and she's not behind bars. That part of the story next. We are back, and we're having a very important conversation with the TAM fam today, a necessary one, if I can say that, about the crisis of human trafficking around this country. And we've been talking with Sara Kruzan. She's the author of the new memoir, I Cried to Dream Again, which details her painful experience of being sex trafficked as a teenager and her battle for freedom after she was in prison for killing her abuser. We're joined also by Dold, a human rights attorney and trafficking survivor who is fighting alongside Sara to make sure what happened to her does not happen to other people. James, thank you so much for joining us as well.
Pleasure to be here, Tamron.
Sara, as we said before the break, you were in prison for over 19 years. In 2013, you were finally set free after Arnold Schwarzenegger, the governor of California at the time, commuted your sentence. You walked into prison a 16-year-old girl and walked out a 35-year-old woman. How do you process the moment? You're walking out, but you said, why did I ever have to even be here?
It was an array of emotions, you know. It's hard to encapsulate the feeling other than that hope and faith and perseverance and the beauty of being able to come together and what that looks like and how you can change really hard situations.
I was so struck by the fact that you say that everyone you met in prison, like you, experienced some level of abuse and victimization prior to entering the system. You were there for years. One of the stories that I covered in Illinois that still haunts me to this day, I went to a women's prison, federal prison, and almost every woman there was the victim of abuse and victimization, yet they were behind bars.
Yes.
What do you want people to know about those women and whose stories aren't on the national news?
That it's time that we go in and we talk to individuals and find out what led up to their particular trauma and not highlight the violence. It's like something happened to cause the reaction. And
James, I know that you studied Sara's case. You got in touch with her when she was still behind bars, and you told her you wanted to help her impact change. And you've been working on the law, Sara's law, to prevent any other children from suffering the way Sara did. What was it about? The obvious details would attract anyone to want to help her. But beyond wanting to, you dove in to help her.
That's right, Tamron. And I think for me, early on, when I learned of Sara's case, it really struck a personal chord because I had been a victim of child sexual abuse and child labor trafficking. I met my abuser when I was 13 years old. So when I was reading through Sara's case file about her experience of grooming and how her abuser really preyed on her vulnerabilities and then used the most precious thing that we are given as human beings, love, against her, it really reminded me of what I had experienced for over 2.5 years of my life as a teenager. And I just felt compelled that what had happened to her wasn't right, that we really needed a stronger legal response in place. And the sad reality is, to Sara's point, the overwhelming majority of children who are in the criminal legal system are victims of child sex abuse, physical violence, neglect, some sort of trauma that they've experienced that have led them to that place in their life. And that's why we as a society really need to wrap our arms around them, protect them, love them, and have a system response in place that isn't just punitive in nature.
Wow.